judicial judgment from the United States. New York's highest court has overturned Harvey Weinstein's 2020 rape conviction and has ordered for a retrial. But it's not just this. It's also the details of the judgment that call for a close watch. And no, this judgment isn't a setback for the MeToo movement, unlike what several headlines seem to be claiming. It's not about a setback or negating the movement. The question mark is on the judiciary and the judges involved, not on a movement that gave space and power for victims and survivors to speak collectively and take up critical cases globally. Getting back to the case, the judge who headed the landmark trial has been seen as quote-unquote prejudiced by New York's highest court. The Court of Appeals found that prosecutors were allowed to call witnesses whose accusations were not part of the charges against him in these specific cases. This is what the majority judgment of the court says. We conclude that the trial court erroneously admitted testimony of uncharged, alleged prior sexual acts against persons other than the complainants of the underlying crimes. It's a verdict that was divided. It was split between 4:3 judges. And the court goes on to say the remedy for these egregious errors is a new trial. This means, simply put, according to the court, Harvey Weinstein was unfairly tried for past behavior, and the court has ordered a new trial. But what does this mean for him, and what does this mean for scores of survivors or those who testified in the specific case as well? We'll get to that in a bit. Meanwhile, this absolute Hollywood mogul producer remains to be in prison. Weinstein was convicted of rape in 2022 in another case from Los Angeles, and that's why he will continue to be in jail as well. But another equally important part of this judgment that has emerged is that of the judge that was a dissident. Judge Magdalene Singas, one of the dissenters, however, has said that with this decision, this court continues to thwart the steady gains survivors of sexual violence have fought for in our criminal justice system. Judge Magdalene Singas wrote that the majority was whitewashing the facts to conform to a he said, she said narrative, and said the Court of Appeals was continuing a disturbing trend of overturning juries' guilty verdicts in cases involving sexual violence. The majority's determination perpetuates outdated notions of sexual violence and allows predators to escape accountability, the judge said. 72-year-old Weinstein has been serving a 23-year-old sentence in a New York prison following his convictions on charges of criminal sexual act for forcibly transforming or performing oral sex on a television and film production assistant in 2006 and rape in the third degree for an attack on an aspiring actress in 2013. He will remain imprisoned because he was convicted in Los Angeles in 2022 as well on another rape and sentenced to 16 years in prison. Weinstein was acquitted in Los Angeles on charges involving one of the women who testified in New York. Remember, it was in 2017 that the investigations by the New York Times and the New Yorker revealed accusations that Mr. Weinstein mistreated women and that his company covered it up. But what does this case mean, one, for Harvey Weinstein and the survivors or testifiers against him? Remember, it was in April 2021 that Mr. Weinstein appealed against his New York convictions, saying several women who had accused him of sexual assault should not have been allowed to testify. It was in June 2022 that a New York appeals court upheld Mr. Weinstein's 2020 conviction on felony sex crimes in a unanimous decision. And what was that about? He was found not guilty of predatory sexual assault, but found guilty of criminal sexual act in the first degree. He was found not guilty of predatory sexual assault and not guilty of rape in the first degree, but found guilty of rape in the third degree. The latest verdict does not give Harvey Weinstein a clean chit, and this is very important to understand. It does not give Harvey Weinstein a clean chit, but will make him go through a legal trial again to find whether he's convicted or not all over again. But what does it mean for women, survivors, or those who testified? And not necessarily women in general, but in this particular case. Advocacy groups have also condemned the appeal's decision. In a statement, the Silence Breakers, a group of people who publicly called out Weinstein's sexual misconduct. The man found guilty continues to serve time in a California prison when survivors everywhere broke their silence in 2017. The world changed. We continue to stand strong and advocate for that change. We will continue to fight for justice for survivors everywhere, the group has said. In fact, actor Ashley Judd, one of the first people to publicly share allegations against Weinstein, told the New York Times, "That's really hard for the survivors. We still live in our truth and we know what happened." And they called the ruling profoundly unjust, but added it did not diminish the testimony of survivors. I'm being joined by Saurabh Shukla at this point. He's the editor-in-chief for Newsmobile in and is based out of United States, has been covering several cases, including this. Adele Nazarian, who's a political analyst and an entrepreneur. Brinda Adige, who's an activist, as well as Parvez Memon, who's a senior partner, MZM Legal LLP. Thank you very much, all four of you, for joining us. Saurabh Shukla, let me come to you first at this point. What is unfolding even as this verdict has emerged? How is United States, how is Hollywood really looking at all of this? This was a case that really had everyone look at what could be the strength of those who collectively spoke up, perhaps for the first time in history, but a huge verdict that also draws back the lens on judicial system itself.
Well, absolutely. I've been speaking to a lot of people, and certainly there is a sense of disappointment. Obviously, the court has found, a flaw in legalese, and obviously, I'm not getting into and commenting on the decision per se, but I would say that certainly it's disappointing because, as you know, in cases like these, it's very, very difficult often for survivors to speak up. It took several years before survivors muscle courage to speak up in this case. And certainly, this sets a wrong precedent for many such cases across the globe because, the entire edifice of Me Too movement started from here on. And I hope, because that courts across, and as you saw that, this judgment per se also was a 4-3 judgment. And certainly, while some aspects of the original judgment, has been set aside, but I would still feel that there is hope. One should not feel that this is the end of the road because obviously it's a long journey. Also, I would say that it sets into motion another thing. My deeper worry is that should this case actually also signal to millions of other women who are facing these kind of challenges, who've been subjected to this kind of I would say heinous crimes like this across the globe, and what is the message that this is sending out? And I would hope that some kind of a remedy will be set into motion to make sure that predators across the globe, they are brought to justice. And I still hope that this case also, there will be a turnaround of sorts where, even in a retrial, more facts will come to light, which will underscore, the heinousness of this crime and also the gravity of this crime. Sneha?
Well, very important point, Saurabh. But before I go over to our other panelists, one more question to you, Saurabh. I, of course, can see that this has almost immediately hit headlines across the United States, across the news streams globally, for that matter. But in responses to this, how's the responses emerging to this? Is there a shroud of silence, or is there a collective conscience that seems to be represented in the reactions that are emerging?
Well, there is, nothing called collective silence. I would say, in fact, there are strong reactions coming out, and a lot of survivors are speaking out. And don't forget that this is election year here in the US, and certainly this issue, because it's related to, rights of women, survivors who spoke out. There were enough evidence on record, and obviously, Mr. Weinstein was regarded as somebody who was the high and mighty of the entertainment industry. So certainly there will be conflicting voices. There are some people who will support Mr. Weinstein as well. But I would still say that the issue is out in open yet again. There is not, and people who think and people who are watching your show today should not feel disappointed, because there is more to it. And certainly, as I say, I always believe that in a democracy, while judiciary is supreme, sometimes judiciary does make mistakes, and there are enough mechanism to set into motion mistakes which can be rectified. And I hope that this case will continue to guide women across the globe to speak up wherever they feel that injustice has been done. And I think that's a sense that I'm getting from the way the reactions are coming out from whether there are Hollywood celebrities or also voices who were very vocal in this case. Sneha?
Absolutely. In fact, let me just get in the introductory remarks from others as well. Adel Nazarian joins us right now. Adel, how do you look at what's unfolded within the court? Two strong parts of the verdict that has emerged. One, the majority judgment, but also the dissident judgment is equally strong and raises some extremely important points. So both sides raising some extremely important points at this point, with the rights at this point, human rights at this point, rather at the center.
Yes. Hi. Thank you so much, Sneha. This is really, it's crazy. If you look at the original timeline as to when this was introduced, the Me Too movement, it was around the time that Donald Trump was running for president. And so Harvey Weinstein was kind of seen, I could say, for all extensive purposes, being used as as kind of a the pawn in all of this to get this whole movement to get started, where they were targeting obviously himself and Trump. But I think that we have to look at the facts here, is that of course there was the dissenting judge made extremely valid points, and it is very disturbing the fact that they are actually appealing this because it's a slap in the face to the women who actually did experience what they went through, and it can't be denied. On the other hand, I think it's kind of crazy also how one of the judges who actually wrote in favor of overturning the court, Judge Jenny Rivera, she wrote down, "We affirm that no person accused of illegality may be judged on proof of uncharged crimes that serve only to establish in the accused propensity for criminal behavior." I think we've seen here that there is a trend ongoing, a very disturbing trend that we've seen for many years that has only recently been talked about how people are treated in Hollywood. Women, men, you have even Nickelodeon recently coming out, Drake Bell. A lot of these accusations have been flying. I think that it's a shame. It's truly a shame that this is actually being questioned. What it does is it does not stop the Me Too movement. I think that at the end of the day, the rule of law absolutely has to reign supreme. But what we're witnessing here is a bit of, I think, honestly, whitewashing a very serious issue within the court system. And what I want to know is this a cherry-picked kind of judgment? Is there some kind of influence behind the scenes that is allowing for this particular individual, Harvey Weinstein, who is very powerful by all standards, to be kind of let off. I don't think he's going to get out of his prison sentence, to be frank with you. I think that it would be a travesty if he was, considering he was taken up as the poster boy, if you may call it, for this kind of a judgment, and to be punished for these bad behaviors.
Adele?
But I think that if he is actually gotten, if it is given a free pass with this, it's only going to set a very dangerous precedent and let many others get away with this.
Adele, one more question before I go over to the other panelists as well for their introductory remarks. Adele, there's also this whole important aspect to one. So many survivors, victims, testifiers in this particular case would have to relive their versions as the retrial begins. So while retrial is hugely important, in this particular case, as the majority judgment says, for the right of Harvey Weinstein, there's the other side of it, that for no fault of theirs, they possibly, and in all reality of it, will have to relive all of it. Isn't that in itself a travesty of justice?
I mean, it absolutely is, Sneha. I just want to point out it's a horrible thing for survivors to have to relive the traumas they've gone through. But I also have to say, through no fault of their own, I think there are about 80 women who testified against Harvey Weinstein. I also have to add here, in fairness, that if a man is inviting you to come up to his hotel room to have a business meeting, something's going to happen that's not professional. And so these women also have the responsibility upon themselves to, even though there was pressure placed on them, to hopefully have the understanding that, hey, he wants something that's not professional. And that was a choice they made. It was a bad choice. But again, it gave no right to him whatsoever, or anyone for that matter, to act the way they did and to take advantage of a situation like that. But there has to be, I certainly hope that they aren't forced to relive this. And I hope that the correct judgment is carried out, because what this is going to do is it's either going to completely desensitize people to this kind of behavior even further and normalize it, or it's going to actually be able to set a precedent and actually create a pathway with which more people in the industry and outside of it will rethink before committing any kind of bad behavior.
Sure. Sure. Let me just get in Parvez Memon at this point as well. Parvez, I want to ask you this particular aspect. One of the judgment says that the trial court erroneously admitted testimonies of persons other than the complainant was admitted. How can this be possibly allowed in the highest court of New York? It couldn't have just slipped through creases in such a high-profile case. If it was such a big reason for this judgment to be overturned, how possibly could have this happened in a judgment in the first place?
See, Sneha, firstly, let me tell all of you that I am a big supporter of this Me Too movement. This judgment, in my view, is not going to impact the Me Too movement. It would, in fact, in my personal view, revive the Me Too movement, as has been rightly pointed out by earlier, that a new movement is foreseen, that women would come with more power to have the Me Too movement revived. Having said so, this is not the only case of Me Too that is being acted upon either in the US or in India. There are many other Me Too, cases which were started after this moment of Harvey's case. So it is one of a case where an accused has not been acquitted per se. We have to look at the judgment in its totality. They have not given him a clean acquittal. They have sent him for retrial merely on technicalities. It does not mean that the survivors or the prosecutrix version has been discarded by the Honorable Apex Court in the New York. They have merely sent it for the purpose that they see some prejudice in the conduct of the learned trial judge when he favored prosecution to examine the witnesses that were not listed within the list of the victims. So that is only a technicality which the Honorable Apex Court found and had sent it for retrial. It does not mean that that is
No,
travesty of
I'm also
justice,
trying to
because
understand,
justice should
Parvez
not only
Mehmet,
be
even if
done,
you're
but it
calling
should
this a
also.
technicality, this is not happening at any first court. This is happening at one of the highest courts. So even
So
if it is on technical grounds, how do we put it in the larger picture? Is this usual? Does it have precedence for such a high profile case to be overturned on technical grounds? I'm sure anybody who would have been hearing this, and I'm not getting into the merits of the judge, of the court's order per se. I'm leaving that for them to decide. But any case that has such high global scrutiny, it's very hard to see that there could be technical lapses or perhaps prejudices, or in this case, what seems to be what the court is implying currently, that testimonies of those who should not have been taken has been allowed in the particular cases. As a layperson, this seems quite far-fetched to have happened in such a high-profile case in the first place.
Well, Sneha, but the records would speak for itself. The court, I am sure, would definitely have gone through the list that was first submitted by the prosecution to the accused. And in the court, the trial has to be conducted in all fairness. The accused is presumed to be innocent until he is proved guilty. The burden is always on the prosecution to bring home the charges. So all that opportunity is required to be accorded to keep in principle that justice should not only be done, but it should also appear to have been done. In this case, if there were some flaws which resulted into the success of this appeal to be sent for retrial, does not mean that the testimony of survivors is discarded. It is only sent for retrial, and I'm sure it will come with more force towards the conviction of the accused, because he is, in our view, in our eyes, with the testimony that is in front of all of us, he is bound to be convicted again. So there is no panic situation in my view. It is only a
Okay.
retrial. Even the survivors, I am sure that within the US justice system, they would not be brought back to the docks to give testimony. Their testimony is already recorded on oath. They have been cross-examined. The only factor that would be reconsidered is whether the testimony of those witnesses which were examined beyond the charge sheet are to be considered or not to be considered. It is not a de novo trial. Retrial and a de novo trial
Okay.
are two different things. That needs to be understood. So I don't think that
All
the
right.
survivors would be re-examined in this case. Only the evidence has to be re-evaluated and re-argued.
All right. Okay, Brinda Adige, uh, what emerged out of this Weinstein movement as a fallout, and eventually that also led to the convictions in the cases that did happen and continue even possibly after that across countries for that matter, was the Me Too movement. How do you see today's judgment for the Me Too movement? Obviously, you have headlines coming up and that's saying it's a setback and stuff. But quite frankly, Me Too movement is so much more than that. But how do you look at it in the context of what's unfolded in the court?
You're absolutely right, Sneha. The Me Too movement is much, much more than this, even though it was this case that launched the Me Too movement, not only in the US, but across the world and in India too. And like the other panelists pointed out, there is no benefit of doubt given to the perpetrator. There is nothing that says that the perpetrator is going to go scot-free at any point of time. But what it does reiterate is the continuous casting of aspersion on the victims and the survivors. And you already pointed out that coming to court and talking about it years after what has happened, the pain, the trauma that all of them went through, somewhere along the line, they will have to relive it. Even though Mr. Parvez said that they would not be deposing again, but there would be cross-examination. That means they will be reliving all of it. And that trauma is not going to be diminished or minimized. That itself is not acceptable. But we are also seeing world over, when cases of sexual violence, complainants are women, the benefit of doubt is all the time given to the man. And the woman is again and again asked to do these things, come and talk about it. But we hope that they will be strengthened and there would be probably more people coming, because that's the only way we must look at this judgment. Because patriarchy is steeped into all of these structures across the world. It's not just anywhere that it is diminished. And this patriarchy also means to want to push back women who come out and speak up, because they've always wanted women to be silent about all of this and sit in that space of, you provoked, you came forward, you dressed like this, you spoke like that. But now I think after this verdict, women across the world will be strengthened and collectives will be coming out to talk even more loudly. And I do hope that the lawyers and the prosecutors will look at every loophole within the procedural system to ensure that something like this does not get into a mistrial.
Okay, Brinda, there's also, I just want to ask you one more question. There's also a very important principle in justice, and that is until proved guilty, one is innocent. So while Harvey Weinstein has not been given a clean chit per se, as everybody has been pointing out, the retrial has been ordered on technical grounds, and he remains a convict in other cases. He will remain in prison in other cases as well. That being one part of it, what would you respond to people who would come in and say, listen, this is just the dangers of a movement, or this is just the dangers of what seems to be emerging in the judiciary and elsewhere, of feminism, of people pushing in their views, of collectively alleging, making allegations. At the center of it is the right of a man to fight, man or woman, to fight his or her battle. In this particular case, it's Harvey Weinstein. How would you, as a feminist, as a women's activist, look at this? And I know there are men on this panel also who are as feminist as the women, but Brinda, to you, this question is to you.
Feminist, humanist, I think we have to look at it from a human rights point of view, from a women's rights point of view, from the point of view of dignity. And here it is the powerful that has preyed upon the vulnerable. And the vulnerabilities of women, especially in the film areas, in the
including the judiciary, isn't it? Quite frankly, including the judiciary. If a whole verdict has to be overturned for legal grounds.
Exactly. So what the judiciary has not looked at is, for eons, they have continued to push women into the space of silence, into that space of being the ones who have provoked, or the ones who have tempted men, never allowing the man, never giving that benefit of doubt to women to say, these men have abused, misused, and taken advantage of their positions, of their influence, of the money that they have, and everything that they control. And I think it is time for laws and the courts to look at issues of sexual violence, assault and abuse and rape, to say that you, the perpetrator, now prove that you're innocent. Why is it that we have to prove? Why is it that women have to prove? So that itself is a very patriarchal notion. And I think it is time for them to understand that feminists, humanists, women in general, men in general, there are many women who are supporting the MeToo movement. It's not just the women, are coming out to say that this is enough. We do not want to take this anymore. And I think the courts now also need to stand. Imagine in the US, there are juries, and juries are very meticulously and very carefully selected by both parties. So what the highest court has done today is actually shunned the jury's verdict also, saying that the jury found you guilty, but we are now using a procedural lapse or a loophole over there to say that you can have a retrial. So at the end of the day, not just undermining women, but also undermining citizens who have sat there looking at this case and giving their own verdict. And that is why we want to say that it is not just a feminist outcry, it's not just feminist shouting, but we are talking of so many people in vulnerable positions who've never had a voice. Today,
absolutely, very, very valid, very important points. Sure. Saurabh Shukla, if I can just come to you. Saurabh, two questions to you. Being in the US, this case in itself was seen as a very landmark case by all means. But would you currently, know if this kind of a judgment where the judge or the jury is being called prejudiced in such a high-profile case by a higher court or the topmost court, is this again unprecedented in sorts? Would you know of that?
Well,
in the United States?
To the best of my knowledge, yes. Although I know that we have a learned panel here, but I would say yes. I haven't seen in the recent past this kind of a judgment coming out, and again, it brings back to the other fundamental questions that should certain procedural lapses should be allowed to sway the course of a case which had become a landmark case because of, I would say, the heinous crimes that were being mentioned here, and also the way in which this sets a precedent. My worry is why I'm convinced that this Me Too movement will only go stronger. The human rights voices will become stronger from here on, but the messaging that is coming out from this judgment is my worry, because it should not signal to predators anywhere in the world that they can get away because of certain procedural anomaly that may have existed. And that is where I would say the judicial system here in the US will also have to bring in safeguards so that the victims, they don't have to suffer through this agony any longer. That's something which we have to ensure in the judicial system. And I know we are in an age where there are need of judicial reforms everywhere, whether they're in the US or in India or anywhere in the world, so that the victims of heinous crimes like these, they can get justice, and that too justice at a fast pace, so they don't have to suffer. And I think in some ways, sometimes cases and outcomes like these only prod you to make sure corrective measures are taken. And my hope is that will happen in this case as well.
Adel Nazarian, my last question to you. At the end of the day, even in India, there is such a strong connect between politics, between showbiz. The two are not seen separate from each other. Both go very hand in hand. Is this likely to play out in elections this season in the United States?
Absolutely. I think it's the very same thing in Hollywood in the United States, Neha. It's not just in Bollywood. It's a global dynamic and phenomenon where politics and Hollywood are interrelated. The late Andrew Breitbart said, politics is downstream from culture, I believe it was. And that's what Hollywood is. It's culture. And as I mentioned earlier, this Me Too movement, while it's been around for decades, the issues have been there, unspoken about. It was started in 2016 at the height of President Donald Trump's election, when he was clearly going to win. And it was an attempt to disarm a person who was politically, in the Hollywood space too, but politically very powerful and who had massive dissidents. And so I think that this Me Too movement will continue. I believe that it's important.
Right.
That said, I just want to add one thing here quickly, if I may. A lot of the Me Too movement allegations that came out against people, some of them were, of course, fabricated, but you cannot discount the fact that many of these women were absolutely victims and are survivors. And so I think it's really important to examine really what the culture is. The culture is in both politics and Hollywood.
Right. I cannot thank all of you enough for joining us on such a short notice. Brinda Adige, Saurabh Shukla, Adel Nazarian, as well as Parvez Memon. Thank you very much for joining us, for bringing in some very important perspectives. This, of course, is one issue that again will be followed globally very closely.